Hello, BookTube. It's time for Poetry Tuesday again. I was a little indisposed last Tuesday, but we're back to our continuing interrogation of contemporary poetry, of the poetry that is where the ink is still wet. And although I've had pushback from some people who, despite their wonderful natures, I suspect of being poetry snobs, we're still once again going to go back to the New Yorker. I am in the course of this ongoing project. This, of course, is not a 2019 project. This is forever. We will go everywhere. We will go to far more rarefied journals, and we will also go to books. But this time around, I thought we'd ease back in with a poem in the New Yorker. The New Yorker publishes typically 2 poems an issue. This is a Barry Blitt cover, Finish the Wall. The cover is called The Real Emergency, and is a reference to political events that were fresh off the presses when this cover was being made, which was President Trump declaring a national emergency so that he could loot taxpayer money from parts of the government in order to fund a campaign promise that was resoundingly turned down by Congress, which has the power of the purse strings. It's supposed to be that if you're a president or anybody else and you need money for a project, you have to go to Congress. And if Congress says no, an evenly balanced Congress such as the one we have now, or for instance, a Congress entirely composed of your own party, like we had for 2 years. If that Congress says no, then you don't get your money. It's not an emergency. That is not an emergency. The fact that you don't get your way is not an emergency. It didn't matter. President Trump declared one anyway, and the cover is a reference to the fact that a lot of the resistance that he was encountering among even loyalist Trumpists in the Senate was the precedent that it sets. If you can call a national emergency in order to get your way simply for suffering a political defeat, then what's to stop? His Trumpist supporters never actually said this, but you could practically hear it in their voice. I wonder how these people don't hear themselves. They practically said, well, what happens when a good president comes along and wants to care about things like education or gun violence or the environment? They could declare a national emergency about something, worthwhile. I know these people are largely in the pockets of their donors, so they probably don't think about it, but nevertheless, it was impossible not to hear that undertone in some of their comments. So what happens if somebody, ethically responsible comes along? And this cover is a reference to that, because that is not, hyperbole notwithstanding, that is not an entirely unrealistic depiction of what it's going to be like in Washington by the end of the century. That's not entirely unrealistic. So, I myself don't think there's anything that can be done about that particular emergency. But I thought the cover was kind of eye-catching. The New Yorker has been largely sparing Donald Trump on their covers, unlike Time magazine, but still. And the back is Bryan Cranston in Network. He's on Broadway in Network, the play of Network, which is, it was a movie before most of you were born, and it was it had a signature scene. It still holds up really well. Even today, the whole movie does, but it has a signature scene where a TV network anchorman, on the brink of a complete nervous and mental breakdown because of what he has learned about the industrial complexes and the power brokers behind the news, loses it on air. There's a famous scene where it's like, I want you to get up from where you're sitting, get up and go over to the window. I want you to throw the window open wide. I want you to lean out, and I want you to yell at the top of your lungs, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. It's became sort of a catchphrase for the country for an era. And I've heard that Cranston is fantastic in this, and that his supporting cast is fantastic too. The cast has, of course, been revamped a little for our own time, but in really intelligent ways, and it makes me a little bit winsome, because once upon a time, I never missed a big Broadway show. Never. I never missed even a lot of the smaller ones. There was a period of time, the less said about it, the better, when I lived in New York, and when that was true, and the shows were $15 a piece, I went. That was what I did with my disposable income. That and the Strand bookstore. But it was even true for a long, long time after that when I lived in Boston. You just take the train. Stay with friends overnight on a couch or in a spare room and go to a couple of shows. That would be a mortgage payment now. These things are so incredibly expensive. That would be a mortgage payment. I don't know how ordinary, I was going to say, I don't know how ordinary New Yorkers do it, but then again, increasingly there are no ordinary New Yorkers. And the ones who are there working on a living wage don't even dream about going to Broadway. But I did the same thing with opera as well. Long after I considered that Broadway plays were simply too great an indulgence, I was still indulging in opera. but let's find one of the poems this time around. This was a pretty good issue all around. And one of the great things in it was a nice, long, ruminative essay by Adam Gopnik on those two Dennis Diderot books that are out right now that we've seen on this channel. Catherine and Diderot is one of them, that centers on the series of individual one-on-one talks that Diderot had with the Empress of Russia. She bought his library to get him out of financial straits and then appointed him as its caretaker with a lifetime salary that she paid, I think, 20 years in advance. And when somebody does you that kind of favor, you have to go and thank them. And he did. He hated traveling. Diderot hated traveling. And of course, at the time, there was plenty to hate about traveling, but he went anyway. Arrived in St. Petersburg half dead. And when he recovered, met with Catherine on many occasions and lost himself in their conversations. We don't have any record, unfortunately. There was no stenography and there was no court recorder or nothing like that, unfortunately, because those would have been precious to have. But there's a new book just on that, and then there's another book on Dennis Diderot and the Art of Thinking Freely. It's just a biography of Diderot with, as you can tell from the subtitle, a kind of an emphasis on his intellectual life. That I just love them both. I thought both books were great. I reviewed them both, which I ordinarily wouldn't do. If in the same month I got two books on pretty much the exact same subject, I would usually review one and not both. But in this case, they both needed attention of their own. And Gopnik doesn't. He pairs the two of them, as every book cover in the world will do. He does a really wonderful job on it. It's my only major question about Gopnik's piece is going to be which of the two books I put it in. Is what I do when I encounter literary essays that are by people I like and are about books that I own. I pull them out of the magazine. I don't keep magazines anymore. I don't let them. They just pile up if you do that. So I pull out the stuff I want and I get rid of the rest. And I do it fairly promptly. So if I come across, there's a new biography and I come across a review of it, I pull that, fold it, date it, and put it in the book where I know that I will always find it. Or that somebody else will. If I get rid of the book, one of the joys of shopping at used bookstores is finding a book review that somebody carefully included in a copy of their book. They didn't take it out when they sold it. I like that. It's part of the furniture of that book now. But this poem is for Chiara. And it's by Rosanna Warren. And do we know anything about Rosanna Warren? She is the author most recently of the poetry collection Ghost in a Red Hat. And I want to know what you think of this. It's a classic New Yorker thing in that there's things to like and things not to like, I think. Leaves crackle beneath our feet. Tinder, kindling. As we walk by the brook, the crabapple tree, a crimson pointilliste nimbus. We want to hold each wounded soul in our hands. Autumn flares, the damaged, the human berserk, find their way to you. I don't know how you sleep. In the Gorgon's blood, one drop is poison, the other heals. Fevered autumn, autumn I adore, croons an old song. We stroll the roads, scuffing dust, and come upon a garter snake lying motionless, its tail, we guess, nicked by a passing car. When we nudge it, it flips to its back in an agonized S, squirms but can't advance. Its belly gleams. We edge it into the grass. Do we stop seeing when we walk away? The brook prattles on. Homes far off. Dusk settles slowly among the leaves. That's not mercy scattering from its hands. I mostly really like this poem, and I really like I really like the flashes of explicitly visual imagery. It's a kind of a narrative poem. We're following two people on a country road, and they're out for a walk, and they're seeing things, and the brook is nearby. We get that twice, but they're in the midst of all that. There are flashes of intensely visual imagery that I really, really like, because I think a walk affects you that way. There are things that you remember even when you're forgetting what you talked about, you all know, those of you who have been on this channel a while will know, that one of the reasons why I'm embracing a contemporary poetry exploration is because I am a huge fan of non-contemporary poetry. I'm a huge fan of the poetry that stopped around the beginning of the 20th century. Poetry that had explicit age-old structures. Poetry that had rhetorical flourishes that were done in a way and with a smoothness and with a confidence that separated the poet who was doing them from you or me. I very much appreciated that kind of poetry. I loved it. And one of those rhetorical flourishes, a signature of the poetry that I love, is a thumper at the end. A thumper of a line at the end. And the line at the end is supposed to rock you back even further than the rest of the poem did. It's terrible that in the wake of the beat poets, we have come to think of such things as cheap theatrics. It's terrible that that is true, I think. They are not cheap theatrics unless they're done cheaply. If they're done really well, then they work really well. And one of the things I love about For Chiara is that thumper of an ending. It's just fantastic, where it comes out of nowhere and you cannot deny its truth. These two people, the two characters in the poem, have set to right an injured garter snake and hustled it into the grass. And the narrator of the poem actually wonders, do we even stop to think about it once we're not looking anymore? The implication being they're not doing the snake any favors, and that maybe they'd be doing it more of a favor to kill it in the road, rather than to put it wounded in a place that is full of predators. And we get that in the last line. Homes far off, dusk settles slowly among the leaves. That's not mercy scattering from its hands. Wonderful. Lovely. So I will, once again, I will copy down the text of the poem for you, and I want to know what you think. I want to know, I'm learning more from our discussions in the comments field in Poetry Tuesday than I am from the poems themselves, and certainly from my rather woolly cogitations on them. I'm much for hearing what you have to say. So I'll copy down the text of the poem, and let's talk about it. Did you like it? Did you not? And then we'll move on from here. Except when I'm indisposed, we will keep doing Poetry Tuesday. So I will wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. We have plenty to talk about. Thank you, BookTube.